Hello everyone, my name is Ellie.
And I'm Carter.
Welcome to our Supreme Court Madness broadcast.
We've got some pretty great matches to cover tonight, so get comfortable as we turn the spotlight to our favorite court cases they battle to the finish.
Let's start off in the constitutional powers and principles region. We've got Plessy versus Ferguson leading the pack. What do you think this case brings to the table that sets it apart from the other constitutional cases, Carter?
Well, Plessy versus Ferguson is very well known as being one of the worst moves the Supreme Court has ever made. I'd call it much more infamous than well known, but very impactful, and that's why it takes the lead.
Sounds about right, Carter. If you've heard the term separate but equal, you're familiar with this case. In this trial, racially segregated facilities were ruled constitutional by 7-1, as long as they were equal in quality. However, despite the uproar it caused, you can definitely argue that this case was the first real step towards equality in a way. Baby steps.
In last place, we've got Gibbons versus Ogden. What's the deal with this case, Ellie?
This court case was fought over 2 steamboats. It ruled that Congress has a right to regulate interstate commerce, and if I'm being frank, I don't really mind if trade is regulated federally or by state, as long as I'm getting my goods some way, somehow.
True that. On to the civil rights and privacy region. Brown versus Board takes the lead, and there's no doubting that.
In this case, we deal with segregation, ruling it unconstitutional in the field of public education. I'd call this a pretty bold move. The Brown family argued that even though these facilities were similar, they'd never be equal. Partly reversing Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board proved that this separation violated the 14th Amendment. We said goodbye to segregation and hello to integration. Way to leave a mark.
Following last, we have Griswold versus Connecticut. This case deals with the right to contraception on the basis of marital privacy, meaning birth control, condoms, and any other contraceptives are fair game according to this ruling. As important this is to society, the rest of the civil rights cases left a bit of a bigger impact on more people than just the homies out there hoping not to get pregnant.
In the Bill of Rights region, we have Gehl versus New York taking the lead.
Gehl versus New York defined the scope of the protection of freedom of speech and the standards of limitation for each case to follow. I'd say that's pretty monumental. Without Gehl, we could be arrested for practically anything that comes out of our mouths.
On the low end, New York Times versus Sullivan ruled that a newspaper can get in trouble for purposely spreading false information about a public official. Not many people are affected by this ruling, and if you're asking me, there's an easy fix. Tell the truth.
Moving on to the political process region, Marbury versus Madison takes first place for obvious reasons. It tackles the idea of judicial review, meaning that Congress can knock down any governmental laws or actions that don't agree with the Constitution. It establishes a proper way to keep the president and legislation in check. And with that, we don't have to worry about any obscene law or action taking over our country's freedom.
In last comes Citizens United versus FEC. Citizens United established that the First Amendment allows political campaigners to spend however much they want on their campaign as a form of free speech. Reality is, these candidates would find a way to make themselves known, budget or not, and the campaigns would still go on.
On to the matches. We had a few close calls. Tinker versus Des Moines and Schenck versus US was close, but Tinker took the win. The free speech of our students to express themselves is an amazing success and affected more people than just the ones considering criticizing our government.
I'd also say Obergefell versus Hodges up against Gideon versus Wainwright was a close one in the Sweet 16. Same-sex marriage versus right to an attorney. This ended up as a huge upset with underdog Gideon taking the win. I guess equality in the courthouse is more of a concern to society than the LGBT community. But I guess, doesn't love always win anyways?
Check out this matchup in the Elite Eight. Check out this key matchup in the Elite Eight. Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the United States up against Plessy versus Ferguson. Now that's a racial inequality debate. What's more impactful? Prohibiting racial discrimination in public accommodations or creating separate but equal facilities? Sounds like the equal facilities rose above because Plessy versus Ferguson took the win, offering the first bit of physical equality to the minorities.
In our final 4, we have Plessy versus Ferguson, Gehl versus New York, Brown versus Board, and Marbury versus Madison.
What a diverse group. Let's start with Plessy versus Ferguson.
1896, Chief Justice Fuller. This case has never legitimately been overruled, but definitely isn't a concern to us these days. It decided that segregation was completely fine as long as the bathrooms, schools, motels, you name it, were equal in condition. This is pretty huge because before this, blacks and other minorities were treated pretty poorly. It also served as a push for further segregation laws to be passed as a movement towards equality. Imagine where we'd be without this case.
Gehl versus New York defined our right for free speech in 1925 under the court of Chief Justice Taft. This ruling gives leftists, anarchists, or any deviators the chance to speak their mind as long as they aren't threatening our government. Because of this case, we're able to share our opinions confidently without consequence, as long as we don't try to overthrow the government.
Brown versus Board of Education stopped the segregation of blacks and whites in educational facilities. Under the Warren Court in 1954, this case overturned Plessy versus Ferguson and united the students regardless of their color. It changed the way the school system worked, integrated blacks and whites, and ignited a change in society.
Lastly, in the Final Four, we have Marbury versus Madison. Critics called this the single most important decision in American constitutional law. Decided in 1803 by Chief Justice Marshall, this defined the Constitution as law, not just a jumble of ideas and principles. This puts a check over the legislative branch, and without it, any law can be passed.
Between Brown versus Board and Marbury versus Madison, Marbury came out on top. Judicial review is a crucial part of our governmental process, so it would be difficult to run without it.
As for Plessy versus Ferguson against Gehl versus New York, Gehl was the finalist. This case established the protection of free speech and the right to our own opinions. This is a liberty that will be a part of our society for life, which is why it came out on top over Plessy versus Ferguson.
In the last match, we have Gehl versus New York against Marbury versus Madison.
Ah, yes, the famous duel between free speech and judicial review.
And the reveal of the winner is now
Marbury versus Madison.
Start.
The idea of judicial review is crucial to keep each branch of government in check. This eliminates bias, bigotry, and misinterpretation of laws and ideals to be sure that the law is fair and square. This case wins over Gehl solely due to the fact that freedom of speech could be in jeopardy if there were not checks and balances. Congrats to Marbury versus Madison on the win.
That concludes today's broadcast. Thanks for tuning in.